Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello. We now move on to the next wave of interest in India and all things Indian, and in this unit I'll focus on the 60s counterculture and the interest in Indian religion, of course, but also in Indian music with the historic collaboration between Pandit Ravi Shankar and the Beatles. Now, what I would like to point out is that these three elements, or all the elements, are not really disconnected, but they seem to be intricately interwoven into one another, because it's an interest in Hinduism and spirituality which began in the 1920s and which continued in the 1960s, which created an interest in Hinduism in India, in the West, particularly among Western youth. The interest in music, Indian classical music, is a subset of this larger interest of the West in Indian mysticism and spirituality, and also just like yoga, which I talked about earlier. The interest in Indian classical music and the famous Jugalbandi between George Harrison and Pandit Ravi Shankar is part of this larger, wider interest in Hindu mysticism and spirituality as an answer to the crisis in the West. The Beatles merely become instrumental in igniting this India wave, the exoticization of India in the West, the fad for India in the West, due to their own popularity in the Western world and also in the entire world. So, dating back to Beatles, we will pick up again the 60s movement, which we mentioned earlier. Dating back to Beatles' 1966 visit to India and their initiation into Hindu religion and philosophy, Hinduism has attracted a number of people, particularly youth in the West. The trend for magical, mystical tourism, as John Hutnick puts it, that set subsequent generations of young white music producers on similar mystical and musical journeys to the East. These made their Hindu-inspired sonic productions intersect with Euro-American youth's 1960s turn to Eastern mysticism and philosophy as a panacea for the evils of Western materialism. Now, we begin with Beatles' historic meeting with Prabhupada. At a Christian reception at Apple Studios, the Beatles were holding a press conference about their upcoming Abbey Road album. John peeked out from the press room, scanned the crowd assembled for the reception, and made a quick exit out of the building. Ringo peeked out and did the same, followed by Paul. George peeked out, looked around the room, and spied the shaven-headed Shyam Sundar, one of Swami Prabhupada's main disciples. Krishna chant starters London. This is a headline in Times of London article. George had seen a photo of him with the other devotees in a Times of London article titled Krishna chant startles London. The article reported on the devotees' arrival in England and their plans for opening a temple. George walked over and said, "Where have you been? I've been waiting to meet you." And so began a friendship that led to an invitation for Shyam Sundar to live with George at his manor home, and an invitation for devotees to record the the Hare Krishna mantra on the Apple Records label. I can see it now, Harrison told them. The first Sanskrit tune in the top 10. So this is the first time that Indian spiritual music jumped on the top of the charts, largely through its adoption by one of the most iconic groups of the time. So we look at My Sweet Lord. Harrison attempted to fuse the messages of the Christian and Gaudiya faiths into what his biographer described as a gospel incantation with Vedic chants through alternating the Christian and Jewish term of praise Hallelujah with the Sanskrit Hare Krishna. So let's look at the renderings of the Mahamantra, by the original renderings and the renderings by George in his My Sweet Lord. I'll have to play this, so you'll have to bear with me and see how the Mahamantra sounds in George's version and the original Mahamantra version. Let's take a look. I'm unable to load it for some reason. Let's try it. If it doesn't work, we'll listen to it towards the end. Okay, we'll go back to it. So what Harrison attempted was that he heard this ancient mantra, the Maha Mantra of the Gaudiya Vaishnava faith, and he created his own version of it in his song My Sweet Lord, fusing it with Christian and Jewish terms of praise with the Sanskrit Hare Krishna. And the simple English lyrics reflect the devotee's desire to have a direct communion with God. Let's look at the lyrics and we'll listen to the song later. My sweet Lord, really want to see you, Lord, but it takes so long, my Lord. I really want to know you, really want to go with you, really want to show you, Lord, that it won't take long, my Lord. So this is much later, of course. When the Beatles, the Beatles and particularly Harrison lent his voice and his support to the Hare Krishna movement, the Hare Krishna movement became immensely popular in the West, particularly in UK, in England and North America. When the Beatles visited India to study transcendental meditation, there was a rapid expansion in interest in Hinduism. Young people were already heading east on the so-called hippie trail, as we saw that this fed into the larger cult for India in the West, a West disillusioned with the Vietnam War, the West disillusioned with its own crisis in modernity, looking for spiritual enlightenment and an escape from the material lifestyle of the West. Paul Oliver examines the lifestyle which they adopted, from living in ashrams to experimenting with drugs, sexual liberation, Ayurvedic medicine and yoga. So make love and not war, which was a slogan of the hippies, disillusioned with the idea of the Vietnam War, where they turned to Eastern spirituality and mysticism to tide over the crisis in Western modernity. It was in June 1966 that the historic meeting between George Harrison, one of the Beatles, and one of the greatest sitar maestros of India, Pandit Ravi Shankar, took place. George Harrison was still a member of the Beatles at that time and a classical musician, and Ravi Shankar was a classical musician, and this meeting took place in London. It's after this meeting that Harrison became a student of the sitarist. Music was like an excuse, he said, for a spiritual connection with the culture of India. So as I said, this desire of the West to get away from Western materialism and look at Eastern spirituality and mysticism as an answer to the problems of the West converged on music, Indian music, spiritual devotional music, classical music, and also practices like yoga. So, the three cannot really be seen in isolation from one another, because the larger objective is to find a spiritual connection with India. And this connection brought Shankar and Indian music unprecedented popularity in the West. And his introduction of the sitar into the Beatles sound inspired a new genre known as raga rock. What is important is that the image of India as a spiritual mystical entity, which was first produced by the Orientalists and continued well into the 20th century with the gurus and the teachers of yoga. This image is perpetuated through the collaboration between Ravi Shankar and Harrison, where music becomes this idea of music, the construction of music as spiritual and mystical and as a means to attain spiritual salvation. This misrepresentation, as some have called it, of Indian music as sacred and as embedded in spiritual or religious practices began with this historical collaboration between Pandit Ravi Shankar and George Harrison. Is this articulation of spirituality to music in classical music, which began in 19th century Europe. That idea of the articulation of spirituality to music in Indian classical music began much earlier, of course, during the construction of classical music in India in the 30s itself, but due to the high profile of both the musicians, both Pandit Ravi Shankar and George Harrison, these images of spirituality, the link between, the unmistakable link between, or the mapping of spirituality on classical music became normalized and naturalized in the Western imaginary, not just in the Western imaginary, but also in the Indian national imaginary through this jugalbandi between Harrison and Ravi Shankar, or even earlier. So, in All Things Must Pass in 1971, as a solo artist with his All Things Must Pass triple album, 1970, Harrison began working with Shankar as his producer. Released on the Beatles Apple Record label. He also the soundtrack to the documentary film Raga Shankar's Joy Bangla EP, recorded to raise international awareness for the plight of refugees of the Bangladesh Liberation War. The live album, The Concert for Bangladesh, which documented the UNICEF benefit concerts that Harrison and Shankar staged in New York that August. So, we look at how the two artists, one from India and one from the West, a popular musician and from UK and a classical musician from India, collaborate to work for world peace and try to use music to solve the problems of the West, such as the Bangladesh war and several other concerts later. Now, I must look at the relationship between Ravi Shankar and Harrison, which is akin to the relationship between Guru and Shishya. So, we have, instead of this ancient Indian tradition of Guru and Shishya, the mode of learning prevalent in India, how this is expanded to include a disciple from the West, and how this reverses the stereotype of the East in the West as lacking in history, in culture and civilization, when an iconic figure like George Harrison metaphorically and literally falls at Ravi Shankar's feet to teach him, to instruct him. So, that creates a new image of India in the West. It reverses the image of India in the West as the taker. Instead, now we have an image of India as the giver, where India has a lot to give to the Western world, and this is symbolically conveyed through one of the most important icons of the 20th century, his turning to Eastern spiritual and mysticism spirituality, in which Ravi Shankar's music, his sitar and his classical music becomes a symbol of this enlightenment or the Indian sacred spirituality, which the West is believed to be lacking. So, the relationship is quite understandable, given that 23 years older than Harrison, Shankar described the relationship as that of father and son, close friends, and teacher and student. An author, Ian Inglis, has commented on the various differences between the two musicians in terms of age, culture, and social status, and yet in another sense, those contrasting factors help to prevent any professional or personal rivalries, produce spaces and separations that the music could fill, and ultimately created a partnership that was never competitive but collaborative. So, this is what Harrison says: Ravi Shankar is probably the person who has influenced my life the most, and this wearing or sharing of the shawl shows the Jugalbandi, the close relationship the two enjoyed. While their collaborations continued only intermittently after the mid-70s, the depth of their friendship remained such that Harrison would credit Shankar as being the person who has influenced my life the most. When Harrison died in November 2001 following a 4-year battle with cancer, Shankar was at his bedside along with members of Harrison's family. So, this idea of Vasudeva Kutumbam, the whole world as one's family, that is visible in the relationship between Ravi Shankar and George Harrison, who the close kinship that they enjoy is the kinship which is prevalent in the Guru Shishya Parampara in Indian systems of learning, as well as this idea of gharana in music, where the disciple takes on the Guru's name rather than of his own family. The 2010 box set collaborations was one of the several reissue projects celebrating Shankar's 90th birthday. It compiles 3 studio albums that he and Harrison worked on together between 1973 and 1996. So, this continues, the East-West Jugalbandi continues in Shankar Family and Friends, Ravi Shankar's Music Festival from India in 1976, Chants of India in 1997. The first 2 of these albums had been out of print, and their inclusion in the box set marked the debut CD for release for both titles. Disc 4 contains a previously unissued concert film from 1974 titled Music Festival from India, live at the Royal Albert Hall. So, we looked at the collaboration between the Beatles and particularly George Harrison and Ravi Shankar as an understanding of how the 1960s in the 1960s the cult for Indian Hindu philosophy and mysticism converge on Indian classical music, on the figure of Pandit Ravi Shankar, to look at music and spirituality as well as yoga and meditation as a panacea for the evils of the Western civilization. Harrison's role on the 3 studio albums was mainly confined to that of a record producer, although his name appeared prominently on the front cover of Chants of India, and the latter was marketed as a collaborative work between Shankar and Harrison. Collaborations presents the albums in reverse chronological order, with Chants of India appearing on disc 1. So, I conclude by saying that Ravi Shankar collaborated not only with Beatles, but that's been the most visible collaboration. He has collaborated with many other musicians, including Yehudi Menuhin, but the collaboration between him and Beatles has been the most visible because it helped in the construction of the 60s counterculture in the West, counterculture which converged on Hindu spirituality, Hindu religion, yoga, meditation, and Hindu devotional music to resist Western civilization. So, once again we find, as in the past, the Orient, Hindu mysticism, philosophy, yoga, meditation, and music are all summoned to the service of Europe or a decadent West, looking for solutions to the problems, and constructs the East or the Orient as an alterity to its own materialism, its own individualism, and a way of solving the crisis in identity in the 60s in the West. We listen to some of the music produced in the 60s by the Beatles, which created a cult for Indians music in the West, not only a cult for Indian music, but also ignited or catalyzed or was used in several of the spiritual movements which began in the 60s, such as the Hare Krishna consciousness movement, through George Harrison's reciting of the Mahamantra and his composition of My Sweet Lord, and later on in the construction of this image of India as a spiritual mystical nation, which we found in Ravi Shankar, with the collaboration between Ravi Shankar and George Harrison.
Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram
I will append it to my PPT so that at the end of the lecture you can listen to the music.